Why are all of these $60 games trying to sell me loot boxes?
The truth is, not all of them are. For the most part, only ones sold by extremely wealthy companies that are looking to get even wealthier through predatory practices and gambling are.
Why are all these $60 games selling me season passes for their DLC? Why are all of these $60 games including microtransactions? Why are all of these $60 games trying to sell me DLC on day one?
Oh, that's easy. Because you make more money selling the shell of a game and then adding expensive extras that used to be part of the original package. Much like a mad scientist would do.
Johnny Long Torso, Johnny Long Torso, the man who comes in pieces.
There are many variations, but the fundamental question being asked is the same. Why are they trying to make me pay more than $60 for this game? Today, we are going to answer that question. AAA games should not cost $60 anymore. And I'm going to spend the rest of this video explaining why.
So I saw this in my feed a little while back. I'm not what you call a regular viewer of extra credits, but I've seen some of their content before, and at times they've made some interesting points. In particular, I felt their Metroid Other M retrospective from a few years back was very well reasoned, and got me interested in what they had to say about things. So you can imagine my disappointment when I watched a video like this with its half-cocked assertions and faulty reasoning from its very core. I've always hesitated to do debunk videos because honestly, I don't know if I'm any good at it. But you can't know unless you try, so let's give it a crack, shall we?
The price for a AAA game was set at $60 right around the launch of HD consoles, the Xbox 360 and the PS3.
And right off the bat, this is 100% completely false. I don't know how old the people running this series are, but games were at $60 all the way back in the days of the SNES. Complete games, with all of their options standard, without breaking out the credit cards for extra purchases. And yes, the price dropped down for the PlayStation and PlayStation 2, but that was mostly due to the increased focus on CD and DVD technology, which were far less expensive to produce than cartridges. Nintendo 64 games still often sold at the $50 to $60 price point new. So right off the bat, we're off to a terrible start. I don't know if anyone told Extra Credits this, but one is supposed to lead with one's strongest argument, not a flat-out lie.
That was around 2005, and the price hasn't shifted again since, but the value of the US dollar certainly has. The rate of inflation over the last decade has averaged out to roughly 2% per year.
So now we get into the crux of things. This was the argument that made me decide once and for all to give this video a shot. Extra Credits, can I call you EC? The entertainment industry is a different kettle of fish from all other consumer goods. Because of its very nature, it is not affected by inflation and recession in the same way that other industries are. That is not to say that they're not affected at all, but to say that this should be a 1-to-1 ratio is utterly ludicrous. Let me give you an example. During the Great American Depression of 1929, consumer businesses and the job market were at an unheard of low, and the American economy was in the toilet. The same applies to a lesser degree during the recession of 2008. But do you know the industry that thrived during both of these times? That's right, the entertainment industry. Movies in the 1930s were becoming more and more popular as the medium rapidly expanded, and Hollywood was making money hand over fist in an era where many people couldn't find their next meal. In the mid-2000s, video games began a similar rapid expansion. They were finding a more widespread appeal, and demand was increasing regardless of the state of the economy at large. This expansion is still continuing, which is why the amount of indie developers has skyrocketed.
According to the best figures I can find, that means that the value of goods has inflated 25.34% since we started selling games for $60. And let's just round that down to a flat 25% to keep the math simple. So due to inflation alone, AAA games should be selling for $75 right now.
Again, this is based on the false premise which I just discussed, but I want to add in an apples-to-apples comparison here. In 2005, the average cost of a brand new Blu-ray movie was $22 to $30, depending on the studio, the production company, and the retail chain. This was in spite of the fact that Blu-ray was a brand new medium and was competing with HD DVD at the time. Do you know the cost of a brand new Blu-ray movie now? That's right, $22 to $30. It's almost like economics is a little more complicated than plugging in one single simplified equation and calling it a day, isn't it?
But obviously, inflation isn't the only factor in play here. AAA games are all competing to have the best-looking game on the market, and that graphical arms race gets way more expensive with each new console generation.
Let's begin with the obvious. You're painting things with far too wide of a brush here. Even AAA games have a huge variance in graphical fidelity and depend on the franchise, the studio, the system it's on, the core audience, and what the game is trying to do. But even setting that aside, you mention and yet quickly gloss over the explanation for why this is false at face value as well, so I'll address that next.
And sure, we have found a lot of clever efficiencies along the way to reduce costs. I mean, heck, we treat third-party game engines like middleware now, and that saves tons.
Correct. This saves tons. Even by your own admission, this is a big deal, and yet you give it a single sentence in passing. The developer tools and engines we have in this day and age are absolutely insane, to the point where even low-budget indie games with small dev teams are able to compete visually. Warframe is a free-to-play game and always has been, and it genuinely looks better than half of the crap the likes of EA and arguably all of the crap that Ubisoft is pushing out lately. And yes, by the way, Warframe has microtransactions, but the difference is they didn't have the unmitigated gall to double dip on the price point. Look, the graphical arms race can only go so far, and gamers are realizing it. These days, a lot of the most popular games make no attempt whatsoever to look good. That's why retro-style visuals have carved out such a significant niche in the industry, with games like Terraria, Minecraft, Undertale, Shovel Knight, Super Meat Boy, The Binding of Isaac, and many other games standing shoulder to shoulder with industry giants. There's only a certain amount of realistic that something can look, but creativity and talent are boundless.
But even with those savings, I would estimate that AAA games cost somewhere between 3 and 4 times as much to make as they did back in 2005.
Oh, a guess, huh? Well, as the late great Christopher Hitchens once said, that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Next.
So, does that mean games should actually be costing somewhere between $225 and $300?
Probably not, which is why they should probably stop trying to do it. Augment your pre-order, baby!
Fortunately, no. Things aren't quite that dire. It's pretty hard to pin down exact numbers on this, but the game-playing audience is a lot bigger than it was in 2005 too. Like, several times bigger.
This has been explained to you then. If more people want your thing, more people pay for your thing, and you make more money from your thing. Why are we even having this conversation if you already get this concept?
And that means that there's a lot more customers to sell to, which helps to make up for that higher production cost, and can result in even bigger profits.
You mean they do result in bigger profits? The gaming industry is more profitable on every single level today than it was a decade ago. From AAA to shovelware to the tiniest indie circles, if there wasn't a profit to be had, all of these new developers, good and bad, wouldn't make any attempts to get into the scene and make money. This is the gold rush of the video gaming age.
If you manage to make a huge hit. Unfortunately, when you're counting on that higher number of sales to make a profit, if your game flops, well, you're going to be losing an impossibly large, possibly studio-sinking amount of money.
Studio sinking, huh? I suppose that's why EA shuts down legendary studios on a whim month in and month out, because the games they made flopped. Oh wait, no. Many of them didn't flop. They just failed to meet the absolutely ludicrous and unreasonable standards EA wanted to reach, so they were scapegoated and fed to the corporate machine. EA isn't satisfied with making a game not be a flop, EC. The only measure of success for them is to make all the money in the world ever. That's why they crammed microtransactions into games like Dead Space 3. The fact is, EA is in no financial risk from a flop. They merely ditched the studio like a lizard shedding its tail and moved to the next rock to sun on.
But since we're just focusing on what the average retail price of a game should be, let's just ignore that increased risk factor for now.
Probably a good idea because it's clear you didn't think it through in the first place. Go on.
Based on what we've seen firsthand working in this industry, much of which is under NDA, unfortunately.
How utterly convenient for you. Really makes it easy for your argument when you can just say, oh, I'm right, but I can't say because it's a secret.
If I had to make a gut estimate, and understand this really is just a rough guess.
I hate to break it to you, EC, but I'm pretty sure we figured that out by now.
I would say that the actual retail price of a modern AAA game, without any additional ongoing revenue sources to support it, should probably be as high as $85 to $90 new.
Well, I don't need to bring up Hitchens' razor again, since you admitted you pulled that number completely out of your ass. But what I will say is that oftentimes so-called digital deluxe editions of games do sell for that much money, and even more oftentimes, the extra features in those editions were things that came standard in previous iterations of the series, but are now arbitrarily gated off until people fork over the money.
Now, understandably, that number freaks the industry out. Who outside of Australia is gonna pay $90 for a video game? I mean, we all saw what happened to the Neo Geo.
The price point was only one of many reasons the Neo Geo home console failed. Poor distribution, lack of advertising, fierce competition, and a lack of games that appealed outside of its established fan base all contributed to its failure. And not just the Neo Geo. Lots of consoles such as the Atari Jaguar and the 3DO arrived during that era, and all of them were chewed up and spat out by the likes of Nintendo, Sega, and even the up-and-coming Sony PlayStation. If mere pricing were a factor, the PS3 would never have risen from the ashes of its initial price point of $599 US.
Ridge Racer!
And this fear has been compounded by the success of the mobile game market, which has sort of trained consumers to think that games should be astonishingly cheap. I mean, for a tablet game, $10 is considered expensive, even if that same game would cost $30 on the DS or $40 on Steam.
Actually, it's more likely the other way around. But the point is that you once again shot yourself in the foot there. Are you saying that you can profitably release games on multiple formats that don't cost exorbitant amounts of money? Do tell me more, EC.
For that matter, Steam sales have been training us to expect cheaper games too.
That's because Steam is a distribution system that doesn't arbitrarily hamstring its publishers the way the current generation of modern consoles do. They don't have to justify massively overpriced hardware with no backwards compatibility, and they are an extremely easy platform to create software for. Too easy in many cases these days, but that's another story for another day.
And so the industry has kept that $60 price right where it is. And, I mean, maybe they're right to do so. A lot of people got pretty bent out of shape when the price got bumped up to $60 back in 2005.
Oh yeah, I remember that. All of us gathered around the coffee table as the president made a solemn announcement breaking the news that game companies from 2005 onward would be federally mandated to charge $60 for games. I still have chilling memories of that devastating event that never fucking happened! Yes, price has always been a discussion point in video games. Always. But other factors are always in play. The reason that pricing is such a hot topic now is because we're no longer paying for games. We're paying for the shells of games that developers sell pieces of later at best and gamble pieces of later at worst. It's a topic of conversation because publishers aren't content with just making record sales and more profit than ever. They need to make all the profit in the universe or else they consider their product a failure. How is this a reasonable expectation? How does this business model make any sense? How can you possibly sit there and defend multi-million-dollar companies as if their CEOs are homeless and starving because their latest assembly line title only sold a couple of million copies? Fucking airplane.
And there is something about the number 70 that just feels like, yikes, that's a lot of money.
That's true. $70 does seem like a lot of money. You know what else seems like a lot of money when you don't offer any context? $60, $40. That $10 latte sure seems like a lot of money. 10 is a bigger number than 5. But yeah, no, 70 is somehow specifically the expensive sounding number. And anything that charges $70 has now crossed that exact consumer threshold where people suddenly click and think it's too much. And I've got a $70 bridge to sell you. But I'll give it to you for only $60.
Industry wisdom really may be right here. Maybe raising that standard price any higher than $60 would lead to a drop in sales. But by not raising prices, we've sort of put ourselves in a tough spot.
Why? If people are buying enough of the product to recoup the production costs and turn an extensive profit, which they do, then what exactly is the issue?
If we are going to cover our development costs, reduce the risk of catastrophic losses, and show our shareholders the return percentages they're expecting, we've got to do something to increase revenue.
Yeah, because fuck public opinion. If shareholders aren't happy, then that is the only thing that matters. Why don't you tell me how badly suffering the pharmaceutical and oil industries are while you're at it?
And we've tried to do that in a lot of different ways, to varying degrees of success. First, we tried increasing revenue by selling DLC, but fans got upset if we sold that DLC at launch.
Gee, now why could that be? Why would fans be angry about paying their hard-earned cash for a game only to realize that part of the game is just sitting inaccessible on the disc itself until you fork out the credit cards and ask them nicely to unlock the gates so you could play the rest of the game you purchased?
And they didn't buy it if we released the DLC later.
Even Nintendo proves you wrong on this one, and they suck at the microtransaction game. Super Smash Bros. For 3DS launched on September 13, 2014. Its final DLC character, Bayonetta, wasn't released until February of 2016. Now you could argue that Smash is a powerful franchise with name recognition, but so are Star Wars and Call of Duty. Don't you dare tell me that you can't continue interesting people with DLC and microtransactions. How long has TF2 been going on? How many expansions has World of Warcraft seen? If they're not buying your expanded content after release, then maybe, just maybe, it wasn't worth buying in the first place.
Next, we tried designing games to be perpetual experiences, games that you would play all year long, because then we could sell map packs and expansions over that game's longer lifespan.
And some succeeded at that, Minecraft being the chief example of this. But that also led to an influx of plotless walking simulators and games lacking a strong narrative focus. If you don't have a reason to keep going on with your journey, you'll question why you're bothering on the journey to begin with.
But supporting those games long-term turned out to be pretty expensive too, and it didn't really work for every kind of game. Besides, players can only actively keep up with so many perpetual games at once, so all of those perpetual games have to compete for attention, and the audience just gets locked down. It's like the MMORPG flood all over again.
And much like the MMORPG flood, people copied an idea that seemed to make sense without grasping the core concept of what made those things work to begin with. If you want to stand out, your game should never be called another blank, like another Call of Duty, another Dark Souls, or another World of Warcraft. Doing that is all but going to ensure that your game is eventually relegated to obscurity under the shadow of a much bigger title that it wants so badly to steal a slice of the pie from.
And so now we are trying the next thing, loot boxes. We'll come back to the specific topic of loot boxes in a couple of weeks.
I honestly look forward to seeing that. I don't know for sure if I'll have uploaded this video before you release it, but I will definitely keep an eye out to see what you have to say, EC. I sincerely hope that you put a little more thought into what you're saying this time around.
But this is basically where we're at, and now we as an audience have to decide what we want.
We as an audience decided what we wanted years ago. The shareholders of AAA publishers just told us no.
Are we okay with paying more for these games at retail? $70? $80? Maybe even more? The data suggests that the answer is no.
Ah yes, focus groups, the most reliable and scientific way to properly gauge the market. Because that never ever goes wrong, does it?
But if that's the case, well, we're gonna have to learn to live with loot boxes or microtransactions or whatever other model the industry attempts next.
Why? What happens if we opt out? What happens if more and more people opt out until we suffer another video game industry crash like the one of 1983? Are you going to point the finger at us and tell us that it's our fault? Are you going to say that AAA publishers had no choice but to keep asking for more and more money for less and less content? Why is it the consumer's responsibility to ensure the market stays afloat? Is this the Reaganomics of the video game industry?
And by learn to live with, I don't mean put up with predatory crap.
Which is why I don't, and why I'm calling you out for endorsing such behavior. So stop doing it!
I mean, we're gonna have to find a way to reward developers for making good supplementary income systems that aren't overly aggressive or in any way required to play competitively.
And this is exactly what we do, because I know you don't believe this, but we as gamers know what we like. We know what is reasonable to ask of us. We know what to tolerate and why we should do so. If a game that I consider to be fun has DLC or microtransactions in it that I feel will be worth the purchase, I might buy it. If I feel the title has earned my purchase, I will purchase it. But I will not be browbeaten or guilted into buying DLC that I do not want just because some publisher desperately wants to claw at my wallet. I have flat out not purchased full games because of their DLC practices, and I know many other people who have done the same. Let me make this perfectly clear. Purchases are earned, not given away. You have a game and you want to sell it, then convince me that it's worth buying. If you have a DLC for the game, it's the same thing. Convince me it's worth buying. If you do, I might do so, but only if I feel like doing it. And if you didn't make a good enough case for your product, digital or physical, then don't fucking blame the consumer for your mistakes.
Monetization systems that leave you satisfied and actually increase your enjoyment of the game you're spending dozens of hours on, even if you choose to spend very little. But make no mistake, those really are our only two options right now. Because, like I said at the beginning, AAA games just should not cost $60 anymore.
Well, once AAA games actually start costing $60 again, we can debate about that topic. So that was it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know in the comments what you thought. I'm very much interested in opinions of all kinds, and I would definitely be happy to know if you want some more like this. Until then, take care and have a wonderful day.